Ever since William of Normandy boldly conquered England in 1066, the Norman kings of the realm had sought to solidify their power over all of Britain. They met a particularly brave and stubborn foe in the Welsh, who steadfastly refused to submit to any English monarch. Tapestries and medieval illuminations tell of the line of kings who for more than 200 years tried without success to bring Wales into the English nation. They tell many stories of pitched battles and fierce struggle. And they tell of the coming of Edward I, a king of power and vision. Edward saw that the key to victory in hostile Wales lay in English castles, manned by English troops and controlled by loyal barons. Which is why, on March the 27th, 1283, King Edward invested Kevin Lestrange as Lord of Aberwyddon in agriculturally rich but rebellious northwest Wales. The king's first charge to Lord Kevin: build a castle there, the finest that modern engineering could produce.
We sailed to the mouth of the River Wyvern. I met there with Master James of Babington, the famous engineer who was already at work on other castles for the king in Wales and Scotland. I hope he proves worth his fee of 3 shillings a day, an unprecedented sum.
I trust you had a pleasant journey, Lord Kevin.
Is the journey from London ever a pleasant one?
Hardly, I dare say. Shall we begin, my lord?
It is critical that we be able to command all the surrounding land and control traffic and commerce through the area.
After surveying the entire area, my lord, I've decided that the outcrop of rock extending into the water provides the best natural defense. I'm sure a military strategist of your skill will agree.
Right, sir.
And of course the river provides an obvious escape route, should one ever prove necessary.
Let us hope to God it does not.
At the foot of the outcrop over there, we will lay out the town.
And that will provide the first ring of the castle's defense? I am very pleased, Master James.
Thank you, my lord.
His Majesty has impressed upon me the urgency of this project. After all, we are in hostile territory.
Carpenters are already building workshops and barracks. And I must say, my lord, the protection of your soldiers provides great comfort indeed.
A necessary precaution. We know the Welsh are watching us.
Satisfied with the progress, Kevin returned home and reported to his king.
Since your last visit, I have laid out the boundaries of the town, which the diggers are trenching so we may build a wall.
Master James, what sufficed in King Henry's
With
time...
due respect, my lord, I have traveled throughout Europe and the Holy Land, studying the great military architecture. Your castle will be the strongest yet seen in the kingdom.
I'm glad to hear it.
It is laid out in defensive rings. The outer curtain wall will measure 300 feet on each of its sides and will be defended by towers and gatehouses. If by any chance, an extremely unlikely one, the attackers succeed in penetrating this area, they will be thwarted by the inner curtain wall, 12 feet thick and 35 feet high, with 50-foot high towers. An intruder would virtually have to fly to get in.
That should hold against Prince David and his Welsh rebels.
In the center of the inner ward, we have the living quarters for yourself and Lady Catherine, your children and servants.
My wife is a particular sort of woman. She will not relish living in this godforsaken outpost. See that you make her quarters as pleasing as possible.
You may have my assurance of that, my lord. Over here will be the barracks for the soldiers, here the great hall and kitchen and storerooms, and here in the safest part of the castle will be the well.
The castle is only as safe as its water supply.
And the town, it will be a simple grid of streets and blocks to be further divided into lots.
Very good. But the town defenses?
The 3 entrances in the town wall will be fortified with double-towered gatehouses, which should prove quite effective.
Most impressive. But how fast can the project be built?
The stone is being quarried and loaded on ships. some of which have already set sail. But when the stone arrives, to maintain the pace of construction His Majesty demands, I simply must have more workers.
And so you shall, Master James.
Lord Kevin sent constables to several English cities to find the multitude of workers Master James required. Over 500 diggers were forced to march all the way from Lincolnshire. Some local officials grumbled, since they had building projects of their own to complete. But Lord Kevin's representatives spoke in the name of King Edward himself. One who was pleased to come was the blacksmith, Andrew, from the town of Chester.
There are already many skilled smiths in Chester, so the call for work in Aberwyvern struck me as a fine opportunity. And with Lord Kevin's terms, I become a master straight away without paying any guild fee. It's a chance to establish myself in the new town, build a house, and start a family.
My Lord Kevin, construction on Aberwyvern Castle is at its height. There are now 3,000 workers on the site, and we have finally secured sufficient master craftsmen to oversee them. In mid-July in this year of our Lord 1284, we began the outer curtain and the town wall foundation. As I explained to you when we last met, the two stone faces are bound with mortar made of sand and lime. And as the wall grows, the space in between is filled with rubble. Materials are carried up the walls on scaffolding supported by put logs set in holes in the walls themselves. We find this the most efficient means of construction. We use hoists and pulleys to lift lighter materials and tools. You understand, sir, that the windows near the bottom of the walls and towers must be small enough so that an enemy soldier cannot climb through. All the windows will be protected by iron grills and can be closed off by wooden shutters on the inside. In your living quarters, your gracious Lady Catherine will be pleased to note that each window will be fitted with glass. Of course, the tops of the walls will be crenelated with embrasures and merlons. Each merlon will be capped by 3 fearsome-looking finials. I have provided for arrow loops in the merlons for your archers. With a wedge-shaped recess cut out of the stone, the archer may aim anywhere across his field of vision without exposing himself to the attackers. One of the many refinements that adds up to the greatest castle I or any other Englishman has ever built.
When the weather turned cold, the partially completed walls were covered with straw and dung to keep the new mortar from freezing and cracking. And so protected, the castle sat through the winter.
It's important to remember that the medieval castle is really a military machine, and every part has a specific function. For instance, crenellations like these at Carnarvon aren't for decoration. As you saw in my imaginary castle at Aberwyvern, they had a practical and deadly purpose.
Just like today, I suppose the military minds of the time were constantly trying to come up with improvements.
Sure. Look at these advanced arrow loops, arranged in the wall so that an archer could shoot in 2 directions from the same position. And the development of the arrow loop in the first place was certainly an improvement over having to expose yourself to the enemy's fire in order to shoot your own weapon. It's because of improvements like these that Carnarvon, built towards the end of the 13th century, is castle building at its most sophisticated.
Before Edward I's time, castles, cathedrals and other mammoth construction projects had taken generations to build, with long delays when the money ran out. Edward changed all this with his castles. He placed the financial resources of the entire kingdom behind them. He set up a bureaucracy to handle those finances, as well as planning and recruitment. He also expected his lords and barons to bear a large share of the cost. He drafted armies of willing and unwilling workers. And so, instead of taking generations, Edward's castles were built in less than a decade.
The earliest English castles were motte and bailey fortifications. The motte was a high mound of earth on which stood a wooden tower. The open space at the base of the motte was a bailey, and around the top of the motte and the bailey was a high wooden fence called a palisade. During the early part of the 12th century, these palisaded earthworks were replaced by stone structures. And during the Crusades, the Europeans came up against even stronger and more impressive castles in Syria.
That must have been an unpleasant shock.
I'm sure it was, but they learned well from what they saw. And by the end of the 13th century, many of these Eastern ideas had worked their way into European castles, along with a number of original improvements.
Such as?
Well, for example, here at Beaumaris on the island of Anglesey is one tremendous improvement over earlier castle designs. You can see that the gatehouse in the outer wall does not line up with the gatehouse to the inner wall.
Oh, yes.
Now, should an enemy soldier get through the outer gatehouse and make for the inner ward...
He couldn't go straight in. He'd have to go diagonally across the defender's field of fire.
Exactly. From there, all the way over to here. Now, that bit of strategic genius was the work of one of the great architectural minds of the Middle Ages, Master James of St. George.
Ah, whose namesake appears in our story.
The very same.
In the spring, the workers returned, and construction went along smoothly throughout the summer of 1285. By that fall, many of the towers and sections of the town wall had reached their full height. And in December, when the temperature dropped too low to work with wet mortar, all but a few hundred of the workers once again returned home to their families throughout England. The next year, Master James brought in 100 extra masons to speed up work on the inner curtain and its towers. As the castle drew nearer completion, timbers were brought from the forests of Dean. Lord Kevin brought his friend, Lord Raymond Le Bouvier, to meet Master James and inspect the progress. Also under obligation to King Edward, Lord Raymond was preparing his own castle to command the northernmost sea route to Wales.
There are 3 rooms in every tower. The lowest one, the basement level, is for storage. In the unlikely event the walls are breached during a siege, each tower may have to defend itself, and so must have its own supplies. The upper rooms will be used for living and working space.
And this must be your dungeon over here.
And it was not finished one day too soon. Just as the trapdoor was set in the basement floor, my soldiers caught a man stealing lead from Master James's storeroom.
I'll warrant your first guest resolved not to pay the dungeon a return visit.
This is a fortress of war. But no castle is complete without a chapel for the worship of God, without whose favor all our efforts are to no avail.
Magnificent. 2 full stories. I have scarce seen such beautiful glass, or such a noble altar. I'm deeply moved, Kevin.
This way, please, my lords.
The gatehouses are the last major construction for both castle and town defense.
Do please watch your footing, my lords. The stairs are not as yet evened. Since the gatehouses are most vulnerable, I had to design them with great care. First, a heavy timber portcullis can be lowered to block the entrance. And beyond that, a set of wooden doors which cannot be opened when the drawbar is slid into place. Arrow loops in the towers allow the archers to rake and pepper the area. And then, of course, there are murder holes cut into the ceiling, through which soldiers above can attack any intruders in the passageway. But that would imply that they could even reach this point. Rather difficult, because the gatehouse defenses begin with the drawbridge. The inner end is weighted, and when supports underneath are removed, that end swings down into a pit, lifting the other end high above the moat.
Most efficient.
And now, my lords, the inner ward, the very heart of the castle. The barracks building is 2 stories high, with a slate roof.
Heaven knows we have plenty of that around here.
The frame is erected first, and the spaces between the timbers fill with wattle and door.
The soldiers will live on the 2nd floor, and the basement is for stables and many of the castle's weapons. And over there is the armorer's shed.
It's been quite a sight seeing these buildings going up around the ward, taking the place of our old huts. Those are top rooms, of course. They're for the lord and his lady and their noble guests. But even the dogs have the finest of accommodation. I mean, look at them kennels in the east corner. And next to that is the mew for Lord Kevin's prized hunting birds. Everything's been thought of. In the castle, you no longer have to go out back when nature calls. There's garderobes built right into the walls. There's a round hole cut into the stone slab, leading right straight down to the cesspit below. Though I'll admit the garderobe isn't the most comfortable place on a cold winter night.
Your great hall will be here. I placed it in a corner of the inner ward so that only 2 new walls will be required. We have used the forces of nature to our advantage. A cistern in the tower supplies a sink with running water. It is convenience itself. And the kitchen will prove quite adequate to service the needs of a great household such as yours.
In October of 1288, more than 5 years after Master James set out the first boundary markers, Aberwyvern Castle was finally completed. The entire outside of the castle was whitewashed, making it look as if it had been carved from a single gleaming piece of stone.
I have now turned my attention to the town. Only the English will be allowed to settle here at first, as His Majesty wants it to be an outpost of loyalty in this rebellious region. And with the promise of low rents and other enticements, the town will attract a goodly number of established, industrious people. Then, once a person owns a house, he would certainly want to protect it if the town and castle were ever attacked.
I decided to settle in the town. And since I was one of the first, I got a building lot close to the well. Soon, houses spread all up and down the main streets. My house has a ground floor of packed earth covered with reeds. I covered the small window openings with oiled sheepskin to keep out the chill. And we depend upon our fire for both heat and light. Trading in wool's been strong in Europe, they say, and the hills outside of town are covered during the day with Aberwyvern sheep. We hope that as we continue to grow, King Edward will grant us a charter, so we can hold a yearly fair like the one at Chester. That would bring merchants from all over, especially for our wool. Maybe even Italians from across the sea. Imagine, Italians in Aberwyvern. Here is Thomas the shoemaker's shop. And over there's my close friend, Oliver the tailor. Looks like he's opening up his shutters to start business for the day. As the number of shops has increased, some locations have become a bit more desirable than others. Though we like him well enough, no one wants to spot behind Matthew the butcher's shop. Oh, that's Robert the barber's place. We aren't large enough for a full-time physician, so we count on Robert to cure all manner of ills by bleeding out the bad humours. The man blowing the horn over there is the town skyard, who'll take your livestock out to be grazed. Hey, mind the window! That's one of Lord Kevin's servants on his way to the castle, and that's where I'm headed to, now that I'm an official smith there.
Andrew had a right to be proud of the new castle. Everyone in the town was impressed. But whether the elegant Lady Catherine would be impressed when she arrived was another matter entirely.
Being bound by the duties attendant upon my station in life, and being my lord's obedient wife, I knew there was no choice but to go and make the best of it. So on April the 23rd, 1289, I arrived at the castle with my ladies-in-waiting, younger children and servants.
For much of our married life, I've been away fighting, wherever my king needed me. So Catherine has learned to manage the household on her own. She is as important to the proper functioning of our family and property as I am.
Master James and my lord spent 6 years making the castle the strongest in the land. I've set myself to work making it as elegant and comfortable as a castle can possibly be. I insisted that Master James install fireplaces in every room of our living quarters, even though it was costly. I think it much to the family's benefit to relax in these smaller, warmer rooms, away from the drafts and noise of the great hall, particularly in the winter when everyone is cooped up inside. I hung the walls with beautiful tapestries from Normandy and Flanders. And I also brought our collection of books from which the tutor Philip teaches our children. I set a great store in education.
I oversee the training of our own soldiers, and when there's time, I often join them for riding or hunting.
I must oversee all the servants. And though the soldiers may have much leisure time, I can always find something for the servants to do.
I was working in the forge on a quiet afternoon in May when a messenger arrived on horseback and asked to see Lord Kevin directly. His message? King Edward was coming for a visit in just a few days.
Our household has been thrown into a frenzy of preparation. And as I think back longingly to those glittering visits to the royal court, I am determined to make His Majesty's stay one that will not soon be forgotten. First, there is the matter of cleaning the castle. All of it. Then, accommodation. Lord Kevin and I will relinquish our own apartment for the King's use. Of course, we in turn will move to the steward's quarters. He to the chamberlains, the chamberlain to the marshals, the marshal to the butlers, and so on. The townspeople, meanwhile, are particularly excited about the royal arrival.
King Edward is making his entrance through town so that we can all catch a glimpse of His Royal Highness. Naturally, all business has stopped. It's not every day you get to see a king.
In the evening, we held a great feast for His Majesty. But the purpose of the King's visit is not entirely social. Though the Welsh countryside has been relatively quiet of late, the King warned me that Prince Dafydd of Gwynedd is raising an army for an assault on all the English strongholds in Wales. His Majesty and I discussed strategy long into the night.
Throughout the night, Lord Kevin's soldiers stood watch from the highest towers, while merchants, craftsmen, and farmers took turns manning the town wall. In the waters around the castle, Welsh ships prevented escape or new supplies reaching the English. And as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Prince Dafydd and his troops grimly marched toward Aberwyvern.
What lay in our way, we destroyed. The flour mill, the livestock barns, farmhouses. I ordered all the grain fields put to the torch. No longer will we suffer the presence of the cursed English in our land. Breached the town wall. Then, house by house, we fought up toward the castle wall.
A few fortunate townspeople made it into the castle ahead of their Welsh pursuers, who were trapped in the gateway between the portcullises. From high atop the gatehouse tower to the inner ward, Lord Kevin watched the destruction and slaughter.
If I could only send forces out to help the brave townsmen on the front line. But if I leave the castle without defences, the whole siege will be lost. And with the Welsh army closing in, I cannot open the gates for any more people escaping the carnage. But now, the battle has come to us.
Outside the castle walls, Dafydd's men assembled in force, preparing their siege towers and catapults. Inside the castle, archers stood poised, ready to unleash the first wave of arrows as the attackers came within their range.
My plan has been to cut off the castle from the land while our ships cut it off from the sea. and to starve Kevin into surrender. But when my messenger came with news that King Edward had dispatched a large force from the north, I knew we could not wait.
They reached the wall. As one attacker fell, another took his place. Boulders, boiling water and arrows kept some away, while others had to be blocked directly on the point of a sword or axe.
My sappers are digging a tunnel under the wall. When they finish, the logs supporting it will be burned. Then the tunnel will collapse, the wall with it, and we can storm the castle and send the English dogs straight to hell.
Inside the inner ward, part of the barracks became a hospital as the wounded were brought down from the walls. The fighting at the castle wall continued without let-up for 3 days as each exhausted shift was replaced by the next.
This morning, news has reached me that the troops of King Edward are less than a day away. Now we must make our final move. I am ordering the tunnel burned.
But throughout it all, my castle remained secure and impenetrable, and the wall over the Sappers' Tunnel proved too strong and thick to fall. The Welsh attackers have done their worst, but they were no match for our castle's defenses. Dafydd knows the advantage is now mine.
We have no way of smashing their defenses before the English reinforcements arrive. The best we can hope for is a stalemate, to keep Kevin in check.
The tide of battle has turned! Finally, I have Dafydd on the run!
I am ordering a retreat. We have no choice. We will need greater strength to drive these cursed English from our homeland. Until we do, the struggle will never cease. We know that God and right are on the side of Wales, and we are willing to die for our land.
There were more battles over Aberwyvern, but in the years that followed, Welsh families began to take up residence outside the town wall. During fairs and on market days, they came in to sell and trade their goods. Eventually, Welsh and English lived side by side, and the town became too large for the wall that enclosed it. When the Welsh became part of the business life of the area, the castle built to subdue them became unnecessary. Thus, the full measure of King Edward's victory wasn't achieved until almost 200 years after his death. By that time, Lord Kevin's mighty fortress stood empty and roofless from neglect. And when travelers came to ask directions to Aberwyvern, they meant not the derelict old castle, but the thriving town.
There weren't many castles built in Britain during the 14th century. There was neither the resources nor the need. Wales was successfully, though reluctantly, brought under English rule, and the next steps had to be economic and social rather than military. The great age of English and European castle building was, for the most part, over.